Joseph and Don, welcome to 12 Geniuses.
Thank you.
You have written a new book, You to the Power of Two. It's about AI, particularly about Identic AI. It's a term that I was not familiar with, so I learned a lot from your book. Joseph, can you describe what Identic AI is?
So when we say Identic AI, we're not talking about a tool. We're talking about an identic identity, an identic replica of yourself. It's a smarter you. It's an extension of you that understands your habits, your preferences, your goals. We're talking way beyond voice assistance. This isn't Alexa. This actually thinks, understands your judgment, and acts like you. It's very personalized. It's adaptive, right? It's not reactive. It doesn't wait for you to type in something and have to contribute. It's proactive and predictive. When you think today about the term agentic AI, it's typically used to talk about doing more, getting more done. That's when they say agentic AI is going to help you do more. Identic AI is about you becoming more. It's about a full expression of you as a human, embodying whatever your traits are to really leverage AI to make them truly superpowers. So when we say agentic AI, that's what we're talking about.
Is it going to go to meetings for me?
Hopefully. And more than that, I mean, it's going to determine whether you should be in the meeting or not, whether you should have it or not. Who should be in that meeting, especially when you think about its ability to interact. I firmly believe that within the next 5 years, people are going to meet each other first. Your identity, your digital identity will be the first way in which you connect with a lot of people. And so imagine you being able to have that type of conversation with an infinite number of people and being able to be told, hey, these are the folks you should be talking to, and this is why. So it really is an extension of our human capabilities to connect with one another.
You know, it's a wonderful thing since we wrote the book. We haven't really done a podcast together. It's great to hear how Joseph explains that, which I think is terrific. And he's right to focus on identity. You know, the notion of digital identity has gone through these different stages. At first, it was identification, right? You are who you are. And that was the world of credentials. And then identity started to change again as identity became not just your credential data, it became your kind of everything data, this trail of digital crumbs that you leave as you go throughout life. And, you know, the virtual you may know more about you than you do because you can't remember what you bought a year ago, what you said a year ago, your exact location a year ago, you know, what diagnosis you had, what medication you took, and so on and so on. And you create all this data. This is the asset class of the digital age. And it's sort of like feudalism. It gets expropriated from you. Back in the feudal era, which was not slavery, you weren't a slave, and it's not capitalism where you were a wage laborer. You were tied to some land. You created some produce. The landlord took most of it, but you got to keep some of it. Well, we create this asset data, these digital conglomerates, this new species of business, the Magnificent Seven, as they call them, who have a revenue or market cap greater than Europe, greater GDP of Europe. They expropriate this data from you, and you're left with a few digital cabbages, you know. And that's a big problem because it means that you can't monetize your data. They do. There's a guy named Jared Lanier who says that there are 1.5 billion people in the world who could double their income if they could monetize their data. It means that you can't aggregate your data together for social purposes that say like to fight a pandemic because it's all in these silos. It means that you can't use that data. You know, maybe you want to give some of it away, anonymize it and give it to science or something like that. And it also means your privacy is undermined. And, you know, people who say, well, Don, privacy's dead, get over it. I don't think that's right. You know, privacy is the foundation of freedom. And so there was a whole period where people like me talked about creating a self-sovereign identity, and we were referring to our identity as data. Well, now, as Joseph says, this is moving to the next stage. Your identity is getting an IQ,
Hmm.
and in the next 10 years, it could be an IQ of 1,000.
Mm.
So you get a superpower. Your Identic AI is your everything. It's your consigliere. It's, Joseph, infinite number of vice presidents, your doctor who's been to every medical school in the world, your personal counselor, your shopper, your organizer, your extension of your, not just your intelligence, but your capability.
The first thing that I thought of when I was reading the book is Hollywood. And I was thinking likeness of actors. And I was thinking, oh my gosh, this is going to enable actors, actresses to be in 20 films or 50 films or a limitless number of films if they're able to license out their Identic AI selves.
We tend to always think about what we're going to lose, but you got to think about the people that physically are disabled, physically would love to be an actor, but can't physically do that. All of a sudden, now they can. All of a sudden, yeah, I can participate. I got a mind. I can participate through my identity, and now I could be an actor. Or you know what? I have a great musical affinity, and you know what? I would love to be able to play a guitar as good as my good friend Don can, right? But maybe I broke my hand or I lost a limb or whatever. But you know what? Through my identity, now I have an opportunity to be able to participate. So we tend to go to the downside in terms of what people are going to be losing, and that's typically what the haves do. But if you think about the have-nots are going to be sitting there saying, wow, this thing has an opportunity to be the greatest equalizer in human history. As Don said, right? This is my everything. And so, I think that we have to be careful, and I'm sure Don's going to, talk about that. There's definitely some downside risks to everything that we're talked about. Don talked a little bit about the dangers of what happens if you don't have individual ownership, sovereign identity. If we don't own our digital identity. Don began to talk about what happens when that consolidates power and the risk that we run. But in general, I will tell you that I am optimistic about the spirit of humankind.
James, I really appreciate that because I'm optimistic to a flaw. It's a fault of mine. But we're going to talk about the benefits and the risks. And Don, I want to ask you about that. But before we go on to that, I was imagining as you were describing Identic AI, I was imagining these limitless number of AIs running around and us being able to have, let's say, a conference of Identic AIs meeting doctors and, having hundreds of these or thousands of these and having them every day. So I have this, you know, this room full of cancer researchers meeting, but it's their identities or Identic AIs. Do you see that sort of future possible?
What I see more is something like what Joseph was describing. You come to work in the morning, and your AI says, "Well, look, here's what's going on. I reorganize your day, which is easy, but I've already solved a bunch of problems. There was an issue in the supply chain. I fixed that. We had some customer issues. Fixed most of them, but one of them I need your help in solving. There are half a dozen conferences today that you want to attend, so I'm going to attend all of them
Mhm.
and report back to you." So that's sort of, I think, what you're getting at. And it's pretty mind-boggling to talk about an infinite number of, assistants.
Yes, it is. I'm not gonna lie. It's
Like
really
Joseph,
mind-boggling.
like Joseph, I don't like the word assistant so much because it sounds like someone who's helping you,
Yeah.
tweak your schedule
Yeah,
Yeah.
or
yeah.
something like that. For me personally, I'm talking about, I'm buying a new house and my assistant, if you want to use that limited word, is out there doing the negotiation, closing the deal,
Yes.
doing all the legal work, and presenting me with 3 fabulous designs for the new building that I want to build, and then selecting 3 contractors that my agents already worked with their agents and collaborated, negotiated a really tight little deal where I can pick the one that I want, and then it's going to manage the entire construction project.
Hmm.
So that's what we're talking about.
Well, I think you've hit on the benefits to humanity. But Don, can you talk about some of the risks?
Well, everyone talks about the risks of AI. Hallucinations, bias, maybe job loss, superintelligence losing our agency. The biggest risk in our mind is none of these. The biggest risk is who's going to own digital you?
Yeah.
Mark Zuckerberg? Google? This is the question of the sovereignty of individuals and their extended intelligence. You think about something like product placement. And by the way, OpenAI just last week said they're going to do advertising.
Mm-hmm.
Now they say, well, we won't integrate the advertising into our answer. Well, we can all be super comfortable about that, right? But there's no transparency, and they own the extension of us to the extent that they've built up these systems. So product placement, you watch a TV show and you see a Coke and you think, gee, maybe I'd like to have a Coke. Well, imagine if Coke, I'm not suggesting they would, but lots of companies would, place an ad in the extension of your intelligence. Or how about place an idea or place a political point of view or place a suggestion to do something that is antisocial, dangerous. So this is the end of civilization. This is not just some tools, Joseph said. This is us with our superpower, and we need to own that. We need to have self-sovereign identic AI. And the book says how that can be done. And it says, let's create a movement to do that.
Joseph, did you want to comment
Well,
on
so
E
I
squared?
think I can't stress enough the importance of owning something. And when you were talking about, the fact that we have some executives and kind of what's the impact to them as they think about moving forward, going ahead, why would they care, right? Well, if you think about an identic twin, an identic identity of yourself, if you don't own something, if you lease your house, do you go in and upgrade the kitchen? Do you go in and do you make sure that you've invested and done all this? No, you don't do that because somebody else owns it. If you own it, what do? You make sure, yeah, I'm willing to invest. I'm willing to upgrade. So if you want your employees to be able and you want your business to be able to reap the benefits of the judgment and the wisdom that they have to have an interest in wanting to invest and make this thing right. It's a very U squared. One of the things that when we created U squared, we took the book and I told Don, hey, this is great, but I want to actually make it real. Let's put this in practice so people can see how this works, right? One of the interesting challenges that became clear very early on is that if you're building ChatGPT or an LLM, you're trying to get the right answer. I'm trying to get Don's answer. That is that's a completely different set of problems. And in order to get Don's answer, Don has to feel that he has to own it. If I can't monetize the data, Don wants to take it to another platform. He's got to be able to take his data, his learnings, everything, and he has to feel as though that this is mine. I can't monetize that. If I want to monetize his data, Don has to be able to participate in that monetization. Because without that, Don doesn't give me the insight the parameters around what he wants his twin to answer, what he doesn't, what he wants to answer, the ill insights. So this ownership, as Don said, it's so vitally important. And the last thing, and he touched on this, man, this is I call it a Pinocchio moment. We're either going to be the puppet or you're going to be the puppet master. You're going to be, it's one of those two, man. It's one of those two. And if you allow this to be consolidated with a few key large corporations, as Don said, man, you're not going to know if it's your original idea or not.
What happens when somebody dies? Where do these go?
I wrote an article called "The Killer App for the Digital Age May Be Everlasting Life." Don't laugh. And this is why we need to own our identic selves, because, when I die, man, digital Don is going to know an awful lot about me. First of all, you can interact with him. He looks like me. And I hope someone buys a New York Times subscription for him and so on, so that he keeps up to date. And, maybe my great-grandchildren can come and ask me some stuff. The ultimate dream, of course, is that we live on beyond our biology, that if that thing actually develops some kind of consciousness, which I don't think is going to happen in my life, but for my kids, for sure, for my grandchildren, that I do actually get to live on. I may not have my biology, but I have my consciousness and my personality and everything else.
Joseph, what are your thoughts?
Well, I think that the important thing to realize is that it will become the most important asset that you own.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a toy. It's not, something that is, of little value. It's the most important asset. It's the highest valued asset. And so I would expect, just like any other high valued asset, that as these mature, people are going to start saying what and how they want to handle it, who owns it, who's gonna nurture it, when they move on. I think that's something that you would expect with any kind of high value asset. I 100% agree with Don that. Look, it's happening. It's happening right now. I mean, I debate with my identity twin all the time. I use it to help me, whether it's preparing for presentations, getting work done. And I already see a tremendous amount of value. Everyone, we have about 35 people now in our company, and everyone has an identity twin, every single person. And what that means is that when we are trying to have a meeting, and Beverly who's my COO, happens to be in Florida, and I'm in Dubai, we invite her twin to the meeting. And it's participated in so many meetings. It's pretty darn good right about now. I'd say it's pretty reflective. So I agree with Don that at the end of the day, this is going to be a natural extension of you. And you would expect, as you would treat anything of value, of that high value, that everything that's associated with nurturing and ensuring it lives on and how to care for all those things, yes, laws and everything and people are 100%, in my opinion, are going to do. There was just an influencer I can't think of the name, but there was just an influencer that sold, I think it's his identity twin or something for well over $1 million, right? That's the first one. And look out, you're gonna get
Yeah, but to your point, why would you sell your identity for $1 million when your most valuable asset is your identity?
He's 18.
He's 18.
He's 18 years old. That's what I mean.
Oh,
He's 18.
So that's basically selling your soul to the devil, right? Don, you're a guitar player. We know we know about the guitar player at the crossroads, but that is selling your soul to the devil, essentially, in modern day. So I want to just shift gears a little bit here, because I've done now about 185 of these interviews with really incredible people like yourselves, generals, admirals, CEOs, futurists, amazing, amazing people. And what I've realized is that humans, most humans, not all, but most humans, including myself, have really, really poor imaginations. And let me give you an example of that. I was reading to my daughters a biography of Helen Keller. She was born the year after the light bulb was invented. She died the year before Neil Armstrong set feet on the moon. That is the change that happened in one human lifetime. Imagine going from pre-electricity to a person on the moon. The Wright brothers flew in 1903 for the first time. In 1919 was the first transatlantic flight. In 2019, 36 million passenger seats made that trip across the Atlantic, and they did it safely. So we have really poor imaginations for what the future can bring. And now change is happening really, really quickly. So what you're talking about, it sounds like science fiction. It sounds like, oh, it'll never happen. It is happening and it will happen. Joseph, do you have a response or do you have some color you want to add to what I was just talking about in terms of the speed of change? And then Don, I know you do as well, but first I want to start with you, Joseph.
What's interesting to me with AI is you think about what are the things that are going to potentially inhibit that? Like what needs to happen from a business leader perspective in order for this vision and everything that we're talking about to come through? You have the usual suspects of encouraging experimentation, lifelong learning, and we'll talk a lot. I'm sure we're going to talk about learning velocity. But to me, the biggest thing that I see from a business perspective as a CEO is the inability for us to change the governance models to be able to take advantage of the power of AI. Here you have companies right now today, as Don has said, deploying agents that can now act, that can take action, but they're giving it to these employees and we're giving them all this new information. Knowledge, which used to be scarce, is now free. It's everywhere. And we're asking them to deploy great judgment and they get this great information and then they're told, oh no, sorry, you got to go get the level of approval from 4 levels back. You got to go get the manager, the manager, the manager, the manager. So what we've done is we've empowered them and teased them with this great power of AI, and then we take it away and say, no, 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 no. No, I'm glad that you think you can make a decision, but you can't. So to me, one of the things that we have to do from a business leader perspective as CEOs is we have to right now address and change the governance model so that decision and power can move freely in the organization and decisions in the value increase exponentially as you move this decision making closer and closer to the customer. And that can only happen not a technological change, the technology is there, it's moving, but it's our inability to hold on to what we define as work and roles and governance that's keeping this from happening. So that's to me, I think is a key action that I think CEOs need to take.
Well, I want to ask about governance, but before we do, Don, I want to ask you about inequality because it seems to me that these tools could lead to widening economic inequality, which will lead to more disruption, civil unrest, and challenges around the world. So, how can we close the gap instead of widening the economic gap that we have?
My view is the future is not something to be predicted, it's something to be achieved. And this can go a lot of ways. But there are things that I'm concerned about. And over the years, I've always been an optimist about technology. And I use this guy Schumpeter, creative destruction. I talked about the web. It's going to come along. It's going to disintermediate all kinds of businesses like bookstores and so on. But new businesses will arise, even in the middle. And it turns out in that case that one of the biggest businesses in the world arrived in the middle. But I did say in the digital economy in '94 that you could get some wave of technology that comes in that it's so fast and so powerful that it actually disrupted entire industries or replaced entire industries. And in the book, we spent a lot of time with Eric Brynjolfsson, who's at MIT, and he's probably the best guy in terms of understanding the technology on labor markets. And he says, I'm pretty uncertain still about how this one is going to go, but I'm starting to get concerned. And I think that, you can just see it right now, and you have a sort of a, I don't know, a marketing department in an organization where people are doing research and they're organizing, dreaming up campaigns and testing things and so on. And well, right now, I've seen that in companies that I'm closely involved with, where they say we don't need 50 people to do that. We can do it with 6. So that's reduction within a certain function. And then you have these whole swaths that are getting, undermined. So Eric Schmidt says that 90% of programming will be done by AI at the end of this year. Now, that doesn't mean 90% of programmers are going to lose their job, because there's just a lot more programming, being done. But I think that we are going to need a new social contract.
I want to talk about a new social contract, and let's go there. And Joseph, maybe you can start, and Don, you can chime in. But I believe that the nation state is very, very important, but its usefulness is limited. And what I mean by that is the big problems the world has are global. Climate change and AI anxiety. And so I've been thinking about this idea of an AI constitution. You talked about governance, Joseph, and so I wanted to start with you, but you were talking about it at an organizational level.
Yeah.
But can you imagine some sort of constitution that provides guardrails for how AI is used so we can all be pulled up and some of us are not left behind? What are your thoughts on that?
In the book, we talk about principles that we think, guide rails that we think AI, that people should adopt when it comes to Identic AI, right? And Don talked about that, transparency, security, trustworthiness. You're concerned about agency. I believe ultimately, though, when, from a U.S. perspective, look, people do what's in their best interest. And this is going to play out. Whereas if it's in a company's best interest to provide these guardrails, i.e., Joseph decides that he's going to invest in his twin, he's going to participate with his dollar, he's going to extend his knowledge with me to help me build this identic twin. If that turns out to be a set of rules and guidelines that attracts me to it, then I think we got a shot at making this thing work. The question is what could potentially derail that? And we've gone through this, and Don has talked about this concentration of power and ownership. So I look at it and I say, yes, without a doubt, we as humans, in desiring, as we see and the value of this identic asset becomes more and more valuable, we are going to demand these things, right? We're going to demand that we see transparency. We're going to demand that we understand what's happening. We're going to demand that I actually own my asset, that I can understand. I don't want a black box. So we're going to demand these things. And we have to hope enough that we talk enough about it, that we educate enough people about it, so that we don't have folks selling off their identity for $1 million, thinking that they've done the right thing. And that's what it, to me, that's what it comes down to. And again, I'm optimistic. I do believe that people will see the power of this. It'll be manifested itself. I do believe that from an economic perspective, it won't just be the right thing to do. It'll be the profitable thing to do. If you have your employees investing and owning in their asset, that asset will be more valuable than the one that you try to create without their involvement. I mean, that's what I ultimately believe, and it'll play out. But I say that with all the reprisals that Don and I have talked about. So,
Don, what do you think? Because what do you think of an AI constitution, a global AI constitution, or probably, to hit more in your sweet spot, a technology, because you're a convergence guy, right? You're looking at all of these different technologies and how they're going to affect humanity. What do you think about a technology constitution?
Well, just on what Joseph said, that I think is right, that business can't succeed in a world that's failing, and businesses need to build trust with their customers, with all their stakeholders, the business partners, the communities within which they operate, their shareholders, their employees. And trust is the expectation that the other party will act with integrity, that they will do the right thing. And right now, if you don't act with integrity, and this may be naive, but I don't think it is, ultimately, you will not build trust. And that's the sine qua non of success in this new environment. Right now, Facebook is facing that. It has not acted with integrity, and it's in deep trouble because there are massive lawsuits that you have harmed my children. You've done things that are injurious to us. So that's why we're trying to build a movement with this book, where I hate to use the word, it's kind of like a manifesto that we need to go out and we need to achieve sovereignty of our Identic AI and of ourselves in doing that. Now, the broader thing on the social contract, and you're right to talk about the American Constitution. That was really a revolution, like the French Revolution and others around the world, that
Yes.
that that marks the transition from kings and nobles and feudalism
Yes.
to capitalism.
Yes.
And as we moved through that, we figured out, well, I don't know, workers are going to have to be literate. Better create a public education system. We created a law. You got to go to school. You can't have one oil company owning all the oil. We figured out that people are going to have to live in the city. So we're going to need some kind of social safety net because they can't just go grow more, produce to stay alive. So we did all that. We figured out we're going to have public companies. Gee, maybe they ought to tell their shareholders something. That was the SEC Act of 1934. Companies didn't have to tell their shareholders anything. So we've not done that. So we lay out the principles of a new social contract. We need the security of personhood, the right to personal identity, sovereignty, in physical and digital spaces. We need the right to education, the right to equitable access to digital infrastructure. There ought to be universal basic Identic AI for everyone. We need health and well-being, the right to AI-enabled healthcare that's safe and affordable and so on. We need economic security and meaningful work. Now, on this one, if it happens that there aren't enough jobs in the existing market structures, there's still lots of things to be done in society. And if they can't be paid for by corporations, we'll find another way through, entrepreneurship or new kinds of digital models, or through the state, or through philanthropy, or whatever, because people need to have meaningful work. Because that's sort of the basis of, you know, uh, um, of self-worth. We need climate stability, the right to clean, safe, sustainable environment. We need peace and security, the right to live free from violence and oppression and conflict. Don't get me going on that one compared to what exists today. And we need institutional accountability, transparency and governance, and so on. So these are the principles that we outline. Now, it's going to be tough to achieve that, given that, in some countries, people can't even talk to each other. But that's why we got to build a movement. This is about power. And it's about power of people to force institutions to change because it is in their interest to do so.
I'm sure a lot of people listening are just learning about identic twins for the first time. So where should people get started? How do you even wrap your head around this besides ordering your book? Where do they get started?
So first thing I would tell you is it's already started. Awareness is already there. You know, Don talked about this. If you go to Google and you're on your phone and, and you're typing in words and how it finishes, it'll finish your sentence for you. Google already has an identic twin of you. You ever listen to Spotify? You want to find out what your teenagers are going through? Spotify, through the music, gives you a summary of the moods, what you're listening to. They have an identic twin of you. So the first thing I would tell you is the realization that you are producing digital data. That's where we started the conversation. Your identity isn't fixed anymore. Your actions and things that you're doing are creating all this data, and this data has intelligence. So to get started, first realize that this exists today. And then once you say, yes, it exists today, then you can begin to think about, how do I participate? Well, the first thing you need to do, in my opinion, your inbox is just a great place to start. When we started U Squared, we said, what do you need to do to build your own Identic AI? Well, the first thing you need to know is you need to be able to capture how you think. You need to know, how do you think? What's your mental model? How do you speak? What are some examples of how do you speak? What are some of the actions that you've taken? You need to look at that inbox. And if I ask each person to say, give me an example of a document or documents or information that describes how you think, how you speak, how you act, you should have that. And then hopefully you go to usquared.ai and you get an opportunity to try our Identic Twin solution, that you own your information. You get to upload it, you own it, you get to see how it's making decisions, you get to download it, take it wherever you want it to be. And we don't monetize that information without you. In fact, it allows you to monetize your digital twin. So hopefully you go to usquared.ai, but whether you go to wherever you go to, the whole point to me of the conversation is please, please, please make sure that you are in control. You take an active role in managing your Identic Twin. AI is a contact sport, man. Don't sit back.
Don, I want to ask you a question on the human capabilities that are most desired in a future of AI.
Obviously, we're going to need strong vocational education.
Yes.
Up at our lake house, the washing machine died. And AI is not going to solve that problem for a while. So, let me tell you about 9 other problems I'm having up there, all of which require an actual human being to solve. But the school system also needs to do something else. It's not so much about skills anymore, because you have the superpower that is really skilled, in terms of thinking about stuff and doing a lot of stuff. It's more about these underlying capabilities that, come from studying stuff like the humanities and learning a new language, studying history. It's about your ability to think critically, to have good BS detectors, because the BS in this world is right out of control and it's only going to get worse.
Oh my gosh.
We need, we need to have, BS fake detectors and so on. You need to have the ability to collaborate, and you need to have a passion for learning lifelong, because you're going to have the sidekick who's literally a freaking know-it-all. So what does that mean for lifelong learning? And how are you going to manage that? We need young people who can function in this world where your intelligence is not just on board, it's off board. Back in the days of the internet, we all made these implicit choices. What are we going to remember on board and what are we going to remember off board? Well, maybe I don't have to remember the street names because GPS can do that, or I don't need a date because I can quickly look it up. Well, now it's not just about what information you store on board or off board. It's what you're thinking. Am I going to think about this, or am I going to let my agent think about this? Well, this is a whole new world that people have no concept of how to function in this new environment. So it's not so much about university and the acquisition of knowledge. It used to be you go to university, you get some knowledge, and you keep up in your chosen field, and you're set for life. Well, now you're set for 15 minutes. You know, and your knowledge base is going to evolve multiple times throughout life. To Joseph's point, 10 years ago, imagine a decade from now what this is going to be like. So, and meanwhile, we're sending kids off to study something useful like computer programming. Well, no, we need to rethink the whole concept of not just what is education, but what does it mean to be a human being in a world where you have a superpower?
In your book, you talked about valuing emotional intelligence, critical thinking, creativity, and I especially appreciated ethical decision making because we don't talk about that enough. And particularly with the amount of BS that you said is out there, we need to use these tools ethically. Joseph and Don, this has been a phenomenal conversation. Thank you for your time and thank you for being geniuses.